Guys, so we are kicking off the USB enclosure design challenge for this year, and we are starting with modeling the USB plug. We'll eventually get to the PCB, but the plug, like we talked about in class, is universal. It's standard amongst all USB flash drives, so that's a perfect place for us all to start. So I had you all create a new document, with your first and last name. And you were instructed to create a new part studio labeled USB and PCB. Before we start sketching anything, I just want you guys to make sure that your workspace units are in millimeters. Since this is something that's a lot smaller, we can't work in inches. We need to be a little bit more precise, so we're working in millimeters. What I also have open is the dimensioned engineering drawing, which I shared with you all. This is what I'm going to be using to actually show you guys how to model the plug on Onshape. So we're going to start off with a sketch on the top plane, and I am going to label or name this sketch plug. We need to get into the habit of, naming everything. We started this a little bit, but we're going to, really focus on that during this project. So I'm going to choose the corner rectangle tool and start at the origin and create a rectangle that is, let me go to my dimension document, 12 millimeters by 19 millimeters. So I'm going to type 12 by 19. Perfect. So that's, the overall length and width of our USB plug. So that is perfect. So that's all we really need to start off with right now. I'm going to go into isometric view, and I'm actually going to select my rectangle, and I'm going to extrude that rectangle up 4.5 millimeters using this dimension right here from the right side view. So it's going to be 4.5 millimeters. I'm going to rename this plug and hit the green check. Okay, so now we have, the basic layout for our plug. If we take a look at the right side view, you'll notice that there's a little notch taken out of the back of the plug. Eventually we will create the PCB or printed circuit board coming out of that notch. But right now, like we said before, we are just creating the plug itself. So I need to come back to my part, and I am, let me just click away from this, going to create a new sketch, and it's actually going to be on the very bottom of the USB plug. So I'm going to look at it from the bottom. It should say face of plug, and I am just going to label this plug cutout. And I'm going to start with a corner rectangle, and I'm going to draw that corner rectangle extending to the very outsides of the plug. So it's going to have, a width of 12 and then a length of 4.2 millimeters. Now, if it turns red, like it just turned red for me, that means that there is a constraint on there. So I actually accidentally locked this into the midpoint of this line. So I'm just going to click this midpoint constraint and delete it, and we should be perfectly fine at this point. So I'm going to go to isometric view, and now I'm going to hit my extrude tool. I'm actually going to hit remove, and I'm going to remove a portion of that cutout. Now, the portion that needs to be left is 2.5 millimeters, and my entire plug thickness is 4.5 millimeters. Well, just doing a quick little mental math, I need to extrude remove it up 2 millimeters. And I'm going to rename this plug cutout as well, just staying organized. Awesome. So now we have, the overall profile of our plug. Before we move any farther, let's also just rename this part plug. We'll name it USB plug. Okay. The next thing we have to do is use the shell tool to remove the inside of our USB plug. So if you're looking at your actual USB, it's just thin metal going all the way around. So we can use the shell tool to accomplish that. So I'm going to choose shell, and then I'm going to choose this face of our plug right here, the front face. It may turn red, that's okay. It's just because we need to change the shell thickness. And if I look back to my dimension drawing, the shell thickness is labeled right here. It's 33 millimeters. So I'm going to type in 0.33 millimeters. I'm sorry. 0.33. Everything should be perfect. And you'll see that we removed kind of the inside of our USB. We didn't remove the back of the USB plug. We just shelled it. So it's kind of hollow on the inside. And you could just keep that as shell 1. So that looks awesome. The next thing that we have to do is then think about these square holes that are on the top and also present on the bottom of the plug. You'll see the note here that's kind of right next to the isometric view of our engineering drawing here. So we're looking at the top view and we're able to see all the dimensions for our square holes. So I'm going to make a new sketch on the top plane and look at it from the top. I'm going to name this sketch Square Holes. And I'm going to start with a corner rectangle. And that rectangle has dimensions that is 2.5 millimeters long by 2 millimeters wide. So I'm going to type 2.5 and 2. Perfect. Now we got to put that in the right position. So it looks like it's 5 millimeters from the front of our plug. So I'm going to type 5. And it looks like it's 2 millimeters from the side of our plug. So I'm going to use my dimension tool again. And that should be 2. Awesome. So now we have that perfectly in position, and both squares are equal to each other. They're equal distance from the sides of the plug. They're equal, in length and width. So we can take a little shortcut and make a construction line. We want that construction line to be in the middle of the plug. So hover over this back line here until you get this square box, meaning that's the midpoint of the line. You're going to click down and just go all the way down vertically. Now we have a nice construction line that we can use to mirror our square. Now we don't need to add dimensions to that because we mirrored it and we know that they're equal and perfect and good to go. I'm going to hit the green check and go to isometric view. Now we just have our square holes on the, or our squares sketch on the top, but we'll be able to also extrude remove those down to the bottom. So I'm going to select both squares. I'm going to hit extrude and I'm going to remove. And you can just leave it as 25 millimeters. It doesn't really matter what we put in for the depth as long as it goes all the way down and projects to the bottom of our USB plug. So I'm going to rename this Square Holes just so everything's nice and labeled, and hit the green check. And now that's perfect. Before we move on, I do just want to change the color of this part just so it, nicely represents what our part looks like in real life. So I'm just going to change it to a gray silver and hit the green check. And that looks great. Now the last part, if we're taking a look at our engineering drawing that we need to create, is this, what I'm calling the inside plug. It's that little black rectangular piece that sits at the very bottom of the USB plug. And we see some dimensions for it on the right side and also some dimensions for it on the front. So I'm going to walk you guys through how to do this. This is probably the trickiest part of creating the plug. So I'm going to make a new sketch, and the sketch plane I'm going to choose is the very outside face of the front of our plug. So you want to make sure when you do this that it highlights just the outside face. I'm going to rename this sketch inside plug, and I'm going to start off with a corner rectangle, and I'm just going to start that corner rectangle at the very inside corner of the USB plug and extend it out. Now, this is automatically 11.34 millimeters just based on how I drew it, and we made, both sides coincident with the outside edges of the USB plug. So I'm just going to hit escape. I'm going to go back to my engineering drawing, and it looks like that inside piece of the plug has a thickness of 1.5 millimeters. So I'm just going to grab my dimension tool and change this to 1.5. I was pretty close. And I'm going to look at it from isometric view and just zoom in. So that's great. Now, I'm going to hit extrude right from here. I want to change the direction, and I need to change the depth. And if we look at the right side view of our engineering drawing here, you'll see some hidden lines. Those hidden lines on the inside of our plug represent that inside black piece that's in our plug. And it looks like that has a depth of 14.47 millimeters. So I'm going to change this to 14.47. Okay, and if I look at it from the right, it's not going to extend all the way to the very end of the plug because remember, there is that wall there. We want it just to butt up with the wall. Now, it still only is telling me that I have one part here. I need to create a new part. So we should have a part 2 come up, and I'm going to rename this extrude inside plug. Hit the green check, rename part 2, inside plug. I want to click away. There we go. Click on inside plug. Change the appearance. Let's make it black. Green check. And there we go. We have our universal USB plug. It's the same for everyone. And hopefully our USB enclosures will all fit around it.